for this, where we're going with this? Okay. That being said, 3 reasons for proponents of affirmative action offer for taking race and ethnicity into account. First is correcting for testing. We know that testing, while it's supposed to be objective, is also biased. For example, how many of you know what your IQ is? You got a test probably the first 3 or 4 days, and do you remember that arduous test? That was an IQ test. No one tells you that. Do I have anyone else in the military? They want it. Do you remember that at all? Some of them don't remember. It's first couple of days you take a very low. I remember it was like an 8-hour. I just hated that. I mean, I didn't know what it was anyway. So we take a test, and it's supposed to evaluate your mental capacity. Okay. Well, the problem with it is those tests are biased. They're built on something we call critical thinking and abstract thinking. Now, every human being is hardwired to think abstractly, but it really doesn't kick in until your middle teen years, all the way up to your 30s. So, 9th, 10th grade, does anyone in high school have solid geometry? Do they teach solid geometry? Okay. So I remember the first day I was in the class, we would see this. And that was supposed to be, the dotted lines are supposed to be 3-dimensional. It shows a 3-dimensional box. And I'm sitting there thinking, it's 2-dimensional to me. It took about a week to figure out what they were really doing so I could see that. Children, when they're born, do not have depth perception. We do, and we just assume when they pop out of the oven, but they have no way of knowing why they have 2 eyes, because everything is in the dark. They pop out, and we know this now. For the first maybe 6 months of life, half the human brain is dedicated to perception, to depth perception. So you and I look down a hallway that's a mile long, and it looks like we have to get down here when we get to, but we know that's not true, because our brains have realized that this is, even though it looks like it's getting narrow, it's the same when we get down there. Children don't have that capacity. They have to learn depth perception. That's the beginning of abstract thinking. So we know you can take a mother's face. It's usually the first thing an infant locks onto. And you can take a picture of it, and you can reassemble it, an eye here, an eye there, a nose here, an ear here, and the infant will notice it right away. And within 2 months, it no longer recognizes it. It has to be put back in order. It has to be in perspective. And the brain is working this whole thing out. It's taking abstraction and it's putting into form, so it's comprehensible. So let's go back to the IQ test. Abstract thinking. Oftentimes you'll see questions, it'll show you a box with little, and one of them is darkened, and then it shows you another picture with the dot moved, and then another one that goes through 6 or 7 iterations, and then it gives you 4 choices and say, what's the next one? And you have to sit, do you remember that? You have to sit there and figure that out. And if you don't have abstract thinking skills, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, in putting you down, then you get it wrong. And if you don't have critical thinking skill, critical thinking is something that's taught in school. One of the things we try and use as philosophy is called a Socratic Method. So I ask you, so what are you thinking? You give me an idea, and how many times do I say, well, what if we look at it this way? What if we look at it that way? If you're in my intro class, I can't, does anyone have a folding wallet? Like a mail wallet that folds up? Ooh, real quick. Here, I'll trade you for now. There you go. I do this all the time. If you come to my intro class, we do this day 1. I said, okay, so how many sides does this have? It's a no-brainer, right? How many sides does it have? 2. Doesn't that make sense? Okay, watch this now. Now how many sides does it have? 2. So 2 plus 2 equals 2. It's got 2 sides to it. How about this? Is this a side? Is this an edge? How about when I do it this way? It's a critical thing. We call it phenomenology in philosophy. It's, wow, this stuff looks... We're trying to look at things and put it into perspective. And so these tests, these IQ tests, are designed to do that. Well, what if you never had Socratic Method teaching? What if no one ever sat down, thank you, what if no one ever sat down and explained how this works, and then gave you example after example after example? So I'm up north for a semester. And I'm teaching this critical thinking class, and one of the early questions is, so your friend lives 30 miles away. you travel, hang on a minute, I have to think how this went. He lives 60 miles away. He lives 30 miles away, and you travel 60 miles an hour. How long does it take to get there? Half an hour, right? Well, this one fellow put distance equals time times that. He went through this whole formula, and it came out to something other than half an hour. And I looked at him and I said, if he lives 30 miles away and you travel 30 miles an hour, how long does it take to get there? He said, an hour. I said, so if you go twice as fast, it takes half the time. Distance equals, and he couldn't get it right. And he wouldn't accept the fact that he was thinking incorrectly. And I said, what do you want to do anyway when you grow up? And he says, I want to be an engineer. Do not drive over one of his bridges. So these tests, then, we know are biased. They're not biased to exclude. We are emphasizing certain ways of thinking because we think it produces a greater access to information and the production of knowledge. Well, what if you never had that? Like ACT scores or SAT scores. Well, you fall in a hole then. And people look at you. My middle boy, has Asperger's syndrome. So we didn't know if Joey would mainline. So we took him in, they gave him an IQ test, and Joey got 38. So they said, well, we can't accept him in school. So his mother said, well, I won't say anything, but he doesn't do real well with strangers. Joey's autistic. He just doesn't do real well with strangers. She said, I won't say anything, but just let me be there. Well, now he scores a 58. Same test. What was the difference? And then it turns out we come down here for my folks' 50th, and on the way back we stop at Marietta, Georgia, just north of Marietta, and Joey's the co-pilot in the car, and Joey's 9 or 11. And I said, so Joe, I had to stay we stayed at the house of a son of a friend of ours up north. I said, Joe, you remember how to get, I forget the guy's name, it was an interesting southern name. He goes, sure. So we get up, and I'm pretty sure we have to get off at exit 17 going north on 75. And as we get close to it, he says, get off at the Kroger Shopping Center. So it just so happens on exit 17 is the Kroger Shopping Center. So I get off and I drive in the shopping center, and there's no way out. I said, Joey, why'd you say to drive into the shopping center? He says, no, I said get off at the Kroger Shopping Center. He associated exit 17. So I said, I'll tell you what, take me to the house. Kid's got what we call eidetic memory, a photographic memory. He scored 58 on the IQ test. Kid's got a photographic memory. In fact, when Joey says, I don't know, he's lying. Joey, don't lie to me, please. So, the tests serve a purpose. We don't want to say, no, you're going to take a test, and it has to be done by Sunday evening. And we call it relative to understanding the knowledge of the course. Some questions are more critical understanding than other ones are, and some are trickier questions than other questions are, because we're trying to see if you can put the information together. And some of you will do a little bit worse than other people will do if you haven't had the training in that. So how valid is the testing? Well, it serves a purpose, but it also has built-in flaws. If you're not given the skill set, there's a chance you're going to do less better. You won't do quite as well as people who've been given the skill set. So we understand that? So one of the arguments for affirmative action is not everyone gets the same skill set, even though we're all hardwired to work in this area. Now, some of us are hardwired to a greater degree and lesser degree. There's going to be one Michael Jordan. There's going to be one Einstein. There's going to be one Dr. King. People who are just naturally gifted. But overall, we think testing gives us some relative value, some measure of how people are doing. So if you want to go to the 4-year college, they're going to give you tests to find out. Here we don't need it. Our mission statement is come one, come all. We want to be open to the community to let everybody come. So we realize that testing is valuable, but testing has a downside. We have to compensate for that. People who come, we know this now as a statistical fact, people who come from inner cities and from rural areas, the rural area people are never mentioned, don't get funding to have the best schools, the best they just don't get it. It doesn't mean you can't excel. But if you have the right tools to work with, life works a little bit better than when you don't have the right tools to work with. So we realize that testing alone does not give us necessarily an open window to as many people who could qualify, because you may not qualify just on testing alone. The second leg then is compensating for past wrongs. If you were denied access, you never had access. If you were denied access, how do you make use of the accessibility that other people have? Well, you can't. That's a flaw in the system. The system is not a level playing field. We talked about that. So if you're at this end of the playing field and you're at this end of the playing field, who's going to get the greater benefit? Doesn't mean you'll excel, but you have the greater benefit offered you. I mean, I have friends of mine that, my sister-in-law at the time, I guess I can't call her that, I'm divorced from her sister, but at the time, they were both single people, they both had good incomes, they lived well enough, and they got married, and I said, you know, you guys ought to be able to save a lot of money. You only have one mortgage now, you have one electrical bill, you have one garbage bill, yada, 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 and within 6 months, they were in debt over their head. I said, how did you do that? They had great benefit, but they didn't know how to use it correctly. So you may be at this end up here, or you may end up finding yourself here. People down here excel and people up here fail. But we realize that when you have access to benefit, you have a more advantage, at least possibility, than you do down here. So we try and compensate for wrongs as well. We try and level the playing field. We try and give access. That's why, at least in a community college, anybody can come. And we even try and enhance it, and we have Dev Ed, we call it. Maybe you didn't get everything you needed for grammar and for punctuation and spelling, or you didn't get everything you needed for mathematics. So we try and level the playing field, and we call that Dev Ed. Everybody know what I'm talking about here? Okay. And then finally, the third one is diversity. We live in a pluralistic society. Why shouldn't we encourage diversity? Diversity, we believe, makes us stronger. Wow, I never knew that. You're kidding me. I met a guy one day from Ohio that had never seen the Atlantic Ocean. It blew me away. My brother went to Kent State in Ohio, and this kid came home with him, and he said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to go see the ocean. I thought, the ocean? That's what you want to go see? So I've never seen the ocean. I thought, where do you live anyway? Well, he lived in the middle America. He'd never seen the ocean. How many of you seen the Atlantic Ocean? How many of you who've seen the Atlantic Ocean have seen the Pacific Ocean? They are different oceans. Blew me away. My boy outside of Portland took me to the coast, and I mean, it just looked larger. It looked more powerful. And I mean, I grew up on the ocean. And the Pacific Ocean blew me away. And I thought, wow, and Northwest blows me away. It's really different looking than where we live down here in Florida. And so if we make ourselves accessible to diverse people, diverse experiences, diverse opportunities, that may well enhance our capacities as individuals as well. And I told you when I went to grad school about Doug Stalker, the guy who was did I tell you about Doug? And then the genius when it came to logic, Paul Bamford, made my day. Probably made maybe a half a grade, just having access to both those men. So, correction for testing, we understand that, but testing is useful. Compensation, although people at the low end can also exceed and people at the top end can just as well fail, and diversity. So those are the three legs of affirmative action that the whole discussion is built upon. There's validity to it, but like all theories or explanations, it has an upside, it also has a downside we have to compensate for. So there's not going to be a perfect solution for this, but it is meaningful to us to at least be honest and look at it with open eyes and say, so how do we deal with it? It's a utilitarian argument. The greatest happiness for the greatest number. So in 10 days, I'm probably going to have 2 students with 89.3, and I'm going to get the same email. Is there any way you could maybe bump me up? I'm so close to an A. And I'll look at it and go, you're real close, 89.3. That's really close. And one of you failed to take the last 3 quizzes, and one of you took all